How does a film depict the mundane without itself becoming a mundane experience to sit through? 2023 saw the release of two films that both in their own ways set out to answer this question. Priscilla and The Zone of Interest are two heavily contrasting films, yet one thing they share in common is their commitment to showcasing banality. Specifically, the banality of suffering, or the banality of catastrophe, you might say. They are slow, lethargic pieces demonstrating an ultra-realistic, non-romantic and unceremonious snapshot of history. It's an artistic decision that was made with the intentions of being respectful to the reality of the situation, as both films are drawing from real-world events. Priscilla is telling a story about how the wife of the most influential rock star of all time was confined to the life of an ornamental accessory at the hands of her domineering husband. The story of Elvis Presley is one of ostentatious luxury and excitement, so showing a colourless, drab counter to that through the eyes of his wife was a purposeful subversion. The muted atmosphere of the film is not only by design, it's essential for what it's trying to convey. This was this woman's day-to-day life. It has quite the justifiable reason for being presented in this manner, as it's literally a part of the experience. The Zone of Interest also has a valid pretext for its own slow and plodding presentation. The aim of this film was to create a striking juxtaposition between mundanity and atrocity, where you had this peaceful nuclear family living in this idealistic garden terrace which resides within the confines of a Nazi death camp. It wanted to confront its viewers with this bizarre contradiction of humanity where heinousness and blissfulness dubiously coexist. It forces one to consider the notion that human beings can become habituated to just about anything, no matter how monstrous it is. The brain will always figure out a way to condition itself to its everyday experiences, and so even something as abominably immense as mass genocide can become not only normalised but trivialised through the mind's eye. Since these are the themes of the film, banality is an essential ingredient to the Zone of Interest storytelling purpose, the paramount characteristic that's a part of the film's narrative DNA and drives the central idea of the piece. It is simply obliged to strongly convey that emotion in order for the ideas of the film to properly come through. And it's a very similar case with Priscilla. The monotony is the story, the cinematic identity of the media. So surely this means that displaying boredom in film can be thematically warranted. But would that also mean that the film is exempt from criticism because of this? Does it get away with being dull simply because that's the point? Does an otherwise boring film all of a sudden become intriguing just down to artistic intention? What I'll say on this topic is that in order for a film to have any kind of value, it must at the very least stimulate the brain in some way. Whether that be intellectual stimulation or emotional stimulation, there must be something concrete for the viewer to latch onto. It doesn't matter what its intentions were, when it comes down to it, it has to draw in the watcher on some level. A movie can showcase the monotony of life through ways that still allow its audience to become engaged with what's on screen. At the end of the day, to be bored is to be disinterested, and if a work of art has left you in that state, then I would call that a failure. The bond that was supposed to form between the audience member and the media was unable to properly develop into anything significant. Sometimes this can be down to the audience member not giving the piece a respectful amount of dedication, but other times the fault may be on the media itself. Would I classify either of these two films as disinteresting, despite the fact that mundanity is a central tenet to both of their narratives? Well, in some ways I would, yes, and I think that's a more than justifiable stance to hold. Priscilla was a film that I did not like, not because it was slow and bleak, but because it only had one simplistic point to express. You understand the entire purpose of the movie no more than 30 minutes in, and once you're made aware of what the film is going for, the story doesn't do much else to expand on its themes. Its biggest sin is that it was repetitive and one note. New scenes would start and add nothing to my experience. They'd have the same pacing, the same thematic point of, oh dear, how miserable and unfortunate for her, and then it'd move on. Sadly, other important factors such as the acting and dialogue felt barren of any visceral emotion. The dialogue in particular felt like it was just doing the bare minimum of communicating the basic themes and plot points of the scene and then moving on. Performances felt functional rather than alive. I didn't feel connected to the Priscilla character because, quite honestly, it wasn't a character, it was a face. A one-note performance that could only project a singular, simplistic simplistic and rigid emotion. The occasional high-stress moments that would occur also came over as wooden and awkward. In fact, if I didn't have the foreknowledge that this was a true story, I would have perceived these moments to be melodramatic and insincere. The intentional mundanity was the only unique attribute that this film had to offer, and unfortunately that novelty ran dry very quickly, as it struggled to expand upon that motif in a way that felt meaningful. Each scene had the exact same repetitive point. There was a style, a muted colour palette, a grey tone, but ultimately the rest of the direction was flat and uninspired. The only thing left to admire was the makeup and hairstyle, which honestly made me wonder if that was director Sofia Coppola's primary motivation for tackling this project. Due to all of this, for the vast majority of the runtime, this film proved to be utterly disinteresting, as it couldn't seem to offer up any new insights on the subject matter that it was covering. I believe there was a genuine lack of substance that led to me being bored. It wasn't simply because the film itself was about boredom. It had so little to say that me becoming disengaged was inevitable. The Zone of Interest is not guilty of all the same faults as Priscilla. The direction is elegant and gorgeous, the performances are utterly naturalistic and believable. Ultimately, there are more objective aspects on offer here than just the artistic sensibilities, including but not limited to the incredible yet harrowing sound design. It had much more to say on its chosen subject matter than Priscilla did with its own topic, and there were numerous scenes that left a lasting impression on me due to how poignant they were. I loved the atmosphere and I loved the ending, but does that mean I loved the film in its entirety? Well, no. Where this film is good, it's excellent, but in between those intervals where it's operating at its most emotionally resonant, the film resides in this state of storytelling that can be classified as well directed, yet also quite repetitive. The majority of this film is made up of scenes that, despite being near perfectly executed on a cinematographic level, add little to the scenes that came before them. It's not as if they have nothing to say, it's just they're saying near enough the same thing, just in a slightly different way. It's that same cynical juxtaposition that you get used to within the first couple of scenes. There are a few moments where the film adds to the discussion that it established at its opening. Due to the film being about monotony, there isn't a gradual degradation of morality nor descent into evil. The atrocities are already in full swing at the start of the film, and there isn't really any significant change until the very end. This leads to a very static plot progression, which could have been perfectly okay, but this forces you to seek your immersion from other sources such as the atmosphere and the characters. The character arcs are left so minimal in this film that you could argue they are almost non-existent. I'd say they behave in the same manner as the film's themes, wherein there is a message there, a profound statement, but it's a very brief statement which never really gets properly fleshed out. Each major character has one scene that hints at an arc they've undergone. One scene. That might be enough for some, but it's totally justifiable if this sheer amount of vagueness resulted in you being unable to connect with these people. These singular scenes are intriguing once they come along, but again, there's an insufficient amount of them. They pique your interest, but they don't envelop you. Rather than giving you a complete experience, the film forces you to cherry pick all of the impactful moments as your brain tries to convince itself that the movie is a masterpiece. Because again, it has a lot of the traits of one, and part of you wants it to be on that level. The juxtaposition that it poses is the initial hypothesis of the film. The rest of the film needed to act as a thorough investigation into said hypothesis, and at least for me, it didn't achieve that. The characters, the themes, the ideas are all underdeveloped, but they're so agonizingly close to being something exceptional that I'm left conflicted. There are semblances of a masterpiece in here, but there's too much thematic inactivity and dead air, scenes that all serve an identical purpose. Its most poignant statement of all occurs right at the end of the movie. Like a lot of great films, it caps itself off with a profound full stop. A full stop that was successful at evoking emotion from me. The ending, as well as a few of the scenes that led up to it, were fantastic in what they had to say, and I once again became enticed by the movie. Only I can't judge the film solely on how I felt directly after walking out. It's the entire experience that matters, and if this film gave me an insufficient amount of substance to engage with for a good chunk of the runtime, then I can't pretend as if that wasn't the case. There simply was not enough thematic value here to warrant a feature film length. So dare I say the zone of interest is boring? Well yes, in that it too frequently leaves itself open for viewers to become disinterested with what's on screen, as it can't seem to expand upon the initial ideas that are established at the outset to any satisfying degrees. It does not give the audience enough, it doesn't give them nothing, but it's still not an ample amount of emotional or intellectual stimulation. I should make it clear that I do not think this is a bad movie, rather a partially flawed one. It has far more on offer than Priscilla, which had next to nothing to say. There were individual scenes that wowed me with the zone of interest, and that certainly did not happen with Priscilla. This video was never about saying movies can't depict boring things. It was more so an investigation into the nuances of why these films, to varying extents, felt stagnant, so we could yield a better explanation than the common and trite excuse of, well, that's the point. There are valid, objective reasons that cause these films to come over as dull in certain areas. The lesson I take from this is that films are free to depict anything that can be depicted. You can depict the miserable, the mundane, the monotonous, but you are still always required to generate an artistic work that has enough depth to inspire the onlookers. Thematic intention can only get you so far. Also, Priscilla's script writing sucks.